Back to school. Here we go. And I don't know if you remember, I don't know how old you are, and how hard it is for you to remember what it was like to go back to school, right? For some of us, it's a little bit more difficult than others. Right, Rick? That's right. It's cool. Mostly when you think about going back to school, in fact, I was just talking to a few students earlier, it's really not about education that you're focused on when you are going back to school, really, right? It's about the friends. It's about the people. The thing you look forward to is seeing the people, and the school stuff is later. You still want to have the cool backpack and the right folders and the cool supplies. You don't want to be the outdated kid, but you're thinking about all the things. The new gear, right? The clothes that you're wearing, the new kicks. Everybody, right? Wanted some new shoes, back to school shoes. And I saw a little girl in my family wearing her back to school shoes this past week, and she wasn't in school yet. And I'm like, that wouldn't fly in my house, buddy. You weren't allowed to put them back to school shoes on until you were walking to school, right? But inevitably they get scuffed up and this sort of thing. But you're thinking about, hey, friends, who's going to be in my classes? Who am I going to sit with at the lunch table? Who's going to be with me during that? Am I going to have some friends? Are there any cute girls? Some of you were thinking about cute guys, this sort of thing. But, what am I going to do this weekend? Or who am I going to do it with? And it was all about kind of me. It was all about me, not my studies, not others. This is me. As we get back to this series that we've called Elementary, it's really just about the basics for us at 3C. The M stands for mission, which we talked a lot about last week, which is we are, as a church, here to be good news, where we live, work, and play. Right? And then we talk about our values over the next few weeks. Today, we're focused on externally focused. Next week, we'll cover pivotal relationships. And then the next week, we'll talk about a disciple-making culture. Those are our three values. And so those are kind of sum up who we are, who God has called us to be, and what he's called us to do. We're here to be good news, where we live, work, and play. And today, we want to highlight the thing that should permeate that always, as all three values should, to kind of explain, who we are, why we do what we do, is that we're focused today on externally focused. So we concentrate on that. And the best way to explain, I can think of, external focus is to talk about the opposite, internal focus. Internal focus, I think, highlights what it means to be externally focused. And to be honest, many of us, we don't need a whole lot of lessons to talk about internal focus. We get this pretty naturally. You don't have to teach people, children, how to be selfish, right? They get it. They get it from a young age. Mind, right? So who taught them that? No one. It's just in them. In them that it's mine and my interest. You have to be taught to be selfless. And that's why externally focus is so important, because you got to fight for it. You got to train yourself to be externally focused, because you're naturally going to be internally focused. Even today, we as adults who aren't in school anymore, we still focus on us a lot like when we were going back to school. If we were going to be in the cool crowd and have the cool clothes and who we were going to hang out with and this sort of thing, we're obsessed many times with do we have a cool house? Do we have the cool car? Do we what are we doing this weekend, and who are we doing it with, right? And now, instead of school, we have jobs, and instead of homework, we got bills. But it's still a lot the same temptation to be internally focused. And internally focused starts whether you're internally focused or externally focused, starts here as an individual. An externally focused person is focused on others, on their needs or their interests or their wants. An internally focused person is someone who focuses on themselves, their self-interest, what they prefer, what they desire. It is about what I or my people or insiders desire. Externally focused cares about others. Bottom line, internally focused people are selfish, and externally focused people are service-minded, selfless-minded. I had a friend, I have a good friend, an old friend that we were hanging out with many years ago out on his back patio outside of his basement floor. And the dog was outside hanging out with us and a few of our friends, and the dog was getting a little annoying. And so my friend, who was probably 5 to 10 feet from the door that he could have just let this dog in at, texted his wife. And said, who happened to be on the 3rd floor in her bedroom, said, "Hey, could you come let the dog in?" Unbeknownst to her, she didn't know where he was, but she marched all the way down 2 flights of steps, 3 floors, comes up to the sliding glass door, sees us sitting out here, including her husband, 5 to 10 feet from this glass door, and she opens the door and looks at him and goes, "Really? Really?" But the problem was, she let him in, that dog. I'd have closed that door, went right back upstairs and said, "Hey, listen." But she let him in. We always teased him that he never saw the inside of his refrigerator because he didn't have to. "Honey, would you get me a drink? Honey, would you do that?" So he never even looked in there. I was like, okay, all right. I remember one time when I was a valet. That's with a V, right? Like this, not ballet. I don't know if you want that image with me in a tutu, but there you go. This is a valet with parking cars. And I parked cars for the Masonette, which some of you might remember, but for those of you who don't, it was at the time the longest running 5-star restaurant, which is the rating back then, in the country. Over 40 years of a 5-star, which was the highest rating you could get. As valets, we dressed up in tuxedos. The only variance to what would be a traditional formal wear was we were allowed to wear black gym shoes because we did a lot of running and hustling to cars. And we stood outside this restaurant. We opened doors. We parked cars. We saw the most famous Cincinnatians come in on a regular basis. We parked the cars. Some of us knew them personally, this sort of thing. And if there's any big famous people that came to town, they always came to the Masonette, so we got to see them as well. And not to mention, drive the nicest cars you can think of. Any nice car, Lamborghini, Ferrari, I've driven it. And it was a great job because a bunch of us there were friends and would get each other the job. And most of us went to the Bible college, which is just up the hill at Cincinnati Christian University and Seminary. And so it was a great gig because we worked with a bunch of friends. We parked the nicest cars, and we, dressed up in tuxedos, which was not the fun part. But it was kind of odd. But we were right downtown Cincinnati, too. And so there was always, let's say, interesting crowds. And we were always seeing activity with intoxicated people and crazy people and this sort of thing. But one of the types of people we would see all kinds of people, were the street people, people that were homeless. And they would always, try to come up and ask for $5-10 and this sort of thing. And we were used to that and just kind of gauged what we would want to do because we had lots of cash in our pocket. This is way before you would charge something. We're talking about the late 90s here, right? And so we would have wads of cash in our pockets running around. And so they knew that, and everybody wanted a piece of that. And I saw one homeless guy coming up to me, and I thought, here we go, just bracing myself for the ask of $5 to $10. And he just wanted to chat. I mean, he was covered in kind of a filth and a grime. He was, the clothes that he had on were very tattered and torn. And he was obviously somebody who was living on the streets. But we started talking, and here I am outside this 5-star restaurant trying to be nice, trying to be good. But at the same time, the establishment didn't necessarily want people hanging around like that. And so I chatted with him, and it came up as, again, still bracing myself for the ask, right, for $5 or $10. And he started talking to me and asked me, what I did. And I told him I was a Bible college student. And he said, really? He seemed very interested in that. He said, yeah, I'm planning on going in the ministry and being a preacher one day. And he just lit up. I mean, lit up with a pride. Was so excited to meet a fellow Christian. He offered me half of his sandwich. And he said to me, hey, can I have a hug? And in my head, I thought, can I just give you $5 or $10, But we hugged. And it was one of those hugs, though, he didn't want to let go. And I wish I could tell you that I thought in my head of the scripture, when you do for the least of these, you do it unto me. I thought that later. I was convicted of that later. But in the moment, I thought, how can I get out of this? That's the temptation. Your whole life, school age, adulthood, to be focused on what can I get out of and get to what I want. When there's emptiness on the other side of selfishness and self-indulgence and self-centeredness, it's still in the moment what we crave for, what we long for, what we want. Which is why, as a church and as a leadership, I'm so proud that one of our values is to be externally focused. Not to focus on us or our desires or our wants, to be internally focused, but we were going to fight to be externally focused. We can succumb to the temptation to focus on my stuff and my money and my house and my interests and my comforts and my time and my rights and my way and my choices. Internally focused is all about me, and I'm proud to be a part of a church who focuses not on what we want, but how we can serve others. As individuals, we have to fight that. As members of a church, we have to fight that. But even as individuals, and even the disciples had to learn this lesson. In Mark chapter 10, listen to what happens there as Jesus is hanging out with his friends. It says, then James and John, the son of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Boy, we could pause here for a second. We probably just close this up, right? God, we want you to be our God, but we want you to do whatever we ask. When I pray, God, I expect to get an answer my way. I'll recognize you as God, but we just want whatever we ask. It's a temptation. It's an internally focused temptation instead of the trust that we have. It sounds like us because we want whatever we ask. I always joke around about the last fight you had with a spouse or loved one, right? I can tell you what it was about. Not specifically, but I can tell you in general, that was about you not getting your way. You didn't get whatever you asked or whatever you wanted. An internally focused person, that's the temptation. Jesus said, hey, what do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and other at your left in your glory. See, they're thinking Jesus is king, and he is. But he's not the kind of king they thought he was going to be. He was going to be the kind of king that we're used to, sitting on the throne that gets whatever they want, right? And if they don't like you, they can say, off with your head. If they don't like what you do, they could say, remove him from our presence. As a king, it's good to be king or queen because you get what you want. And they thought, we'll recognize you as God, but can we sit on your right hand? Because then the only person that can't tell us what to do is you. Or the other one could sit on the left. I'll settle for the left, Jesus. But can we sit on your right and left? Can we be the second and third in charge so that we can get our way pretty much with everybody? This is what James and John were asking for. Internal focus. When the 10 heard about this, the other disciples, when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. That's such a Bible word, right? They became indignant with James and John. I would love to see the real life version. They were ticked. They were ticked because they didn't think to ask this first. They were like, I should have thought of that. Or maybe they were ticked because their positioning for power and getting what they want flies in the face of everything Jesus had been trying to teach them at this point. And he listened carefully, 3C, to what Jesus says and how he responds. Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first should be slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And to give his life as a ransom for many. 3C, if we're listening to this, it is a powerful corrective from Jesus to an inward-focused church, to guard ourselves against such things. That our enemy would love to get us thinking about ourselves, because not only does it distract us from our purpose to go and make disciples, to be good news, but it distracts us from the truth of who we are, our identity as servants of the King, as holy, chosen, dearly loved servants of the King. And the truth of the matter is, all you have to do is look at psychology leaders and social science leaders to see evidence that thinking of yourself, or thinking too much of yourself, is not good for you. That self-dwelling is not healthy. And it doesn't matter which way you're thinking of yourself, whether that's in an inflated, egotistical, overly complimentary way, not good for you. Or whether you think of yourself negatively with destructive criticism or demeaning or demoralizing ways. Either way, it is not good for you. And either way, the enemy will settle for you to think about yourself. Even dealing with your own sin, this is why we talk about sin management not being our job. Your sin has been bought and paid for. Jesus has already taken care of that 2,000 years ago. Your focus is not to overcome your sin. Your sin has already been overcome. And your job is to look to God and say, I trust you. What would you have me to do? And almost always that looks something like serving others. That's part of your true identity and your purpose. But your enemy would love to have you wallow in guilt or shame. And he would love to see you boast in pride and arrogance, because either way, you're focused internally. You're focused on yourself. And you're off target of what your true identity is and what your true purpose is. And the scriptures are clear. Jesus is clear that for us to have an external focus, but it requires a battle individually, not to be selfish, but to be selfless. And to practice external focus as an individual contributes to our external focus as a church. To practice external focus individually, collectively, as a church, we need to practice it as well. We can be internally focused as an individual, but we can also be internally focused as a church. Just like individuals, we can all be tempted to have an internal focus. And churches are no different. They fall into temptation about focusing on what they want, on being served, on internal interest as well. After all, churches are made up of people, okay? Most of you know this, but the idea here is that this building, this property is not the church. We don't go to a church. It's a building that houses the people of God who are the church. But all of us can be deceived into thinking, being self-centered. We can all be involved in our own interest and focus on that, even when it looks religious. Even when it's religious activities, it can be internally focused. So any church can be internally focused if the individuals are focused internally. Or, as our leadership has decided, that we will fight for an external focus. But it takes work, and it takes fight, which is why we want to talk about it today. Our elders don't lord it over, and I'm so proud of them. In fact, most of you don't even know who our elders are, which there's good and bad to that, but at the same time, I think they like it that way, and I think part of it, I know part of it, is because it's not about them. It's not about them. This is not about a position. This is not about notoriety. This is not about how the church can serve. The heartbeat of our elders is about the people who need Jesus, and to get the people who are here to align themselves with the identity and purpose that Jesus has given us. Paul wrote to a church in a place called Philippi, pleading with them to maintain an external focus when he wrote this in Philippians 2. Do nothing. He wrote to the church of Philippi, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of others. Notice that he says vain conceit. I think churches start teaching the sin management instead of grace when they're full of vain conceit, whether they are teaching, hey, you got to get your act together, or we have our act together. Either place is a dangerous place to be, and a lie about our identity and purpose in God. The other phrase that Paul uses in that short verse is selfish ambition, where churches can start planning to satisfy their own desires, their own interests, instead of being focused on the interests of others. It can quickly happen that when individuals are internally focused, that the church can be internally focused. I don't know if you've seen or visited any of these fine establishments. It's a little crowded there. You might identify them if you've been in these establishments. One is called Pig Candy Barbecue in Loveland. Anybody been to Pig Candy Barbecue? All right, sounds pretty good. All right, we've got a few. Pig Candy Barbecue. Then we got the Urban Artifact, which is in Northside. I think we're going across the top of the screen here, maybe not. Taft Ale House. I don't think it's there anymore, but it used to be this restaurant and brewery, and Leaping Lizard Gallery is up there, and the Palomar Cincinnati, and I could have thrown many different other options like the Pitch or the Transept or the Bell Event Center or the Monastery Event Center. You know what all these have in common, whether you've been to them or not? They used to be houses of worship. They used to be churches. You don't have to drive very far to see a church with doors are closed, or it's been repurposed. But certainly if you go around the city, it's definitely downtown Cincinnati, most of what used to be houses of worship or church buildings are now nothing but restaurants, art galleries, and museums. Why? Well, one, because they died. And they died because they took their eye off the ball. They took their eye off what God had called them to and turned it internally to focus on what pleased them, what satisfied them, instead of what God had called them to. And sadly, too many churches have lost sight of what God has put as their target. Too many have turned internally focused, and I love the church, and I hate to talk poorly about them. But we are called to have an external focus, and we are certainly willing to fight for that here at 3C. To be good news where we live, work, and play. That doesn't mean we sit here and entertain ourselves and make ourselves happy. No, it means we are called to an external focus. That means we have to keep our neighbors in mind and how they see good news and try to deliver that good news with the opportunity, that hope and prayer that being good news will turn into an opportunity to share good news. But you have to think of outsiders, others, your neighbors, the people where you live, work, and play with, how they receive blessing and good news. That's an important perspective. I don't know if you've ever heard of the 5 love languages. This is helpful for marriages. There's many other tools out there, but there are 5 typical love languages that are identified in this book. It talks about quality time. It talks about gift giving, physical touch, acts of service, and words of affirmation. And the claim in the book is that your spouse probably identifies and receives love one way, and you probably receive love one primarily way, a couple ways. But that the important part about this is understanding that we're not all the same, that we don't interpret love or good news in the same way. I've jokingly said that I've never looked sexier than when I'm vacuuming the carpet to my wife, because acts of service is her primary love language. So sometimes I'll just get the vacuum out. How you doing? But that's how she receives love. Our neighbors are no good. Now, I wouldn't recommend physical touching your neighbors, right? But you have to think about how are they receiving good news? And we have to be careful. We're going to talk more about this next week when we talk about pivotal relationships. But how do they interpret good news, and how could I be good news to them? It takes a little creativity to bridge relationships, to put yourself in a position to really be pivotal in somebody's life. The Apostle Paul is a great example of external focus. I want to read this one section that he writes in 1 Corinthians 9. He says, though I am free and belong to no one, I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. See, he adjusted his behavior, his lifestyle, how he carried out to whoever he was trying to reach, in order to hopefully be able to be good news and communicate the good news of Jesus. Verse 21, he says, to those not having the law, I became one like one not having the law. Though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I might share in its blessings. Just, Paul's not focused on his preferences, on his interests, on his own passions. And not focused on his own rights or political opinions or preference of worship songs. How many times do we have to see an athlete or an actor or a rock star achieve all their dreams and climb to the top, expecting it to fulfill them, and it doesn't? For Paul, the principle is the gospel. He understands that trusting God to be whoever he needs to be to reach some is his purpose. The principle is Jesus and the gospel that he delivers and represents. The method was being good news for Paul. Whoever he was with, whoever he lived with and worked with and played with, this was true of Paul in his life, in his mission, in his strategy, and it should be true of every Christian, everyone that calls themselves a follower of Jesus. He says, I have become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. Externally focused. Now, some of you might hear that and be tempted to say, I ain't changing for no one. I am what I am. If they don't like that, they can lump it. It's tough. Well, I just want to encourage you to read back what Paul said, coming all things to all people, but let me remind you about what somebody else said. Jesus said, you know Jesus, right? The Almighty, the Alpha and Omega, the guy who was fully man and fully God, the creator of the universe, the man that was the way, is the way, the truth, and the life, the man that's the King of kings and the Lord of lords. Remember what the man on the middle cross who suffered and died and rose again for you said on this subject. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Believe it or not, this is the path to life, the way, the truth, and the life. It's externally focused. Everybody who ends up being internally focused ends up being sad and lonely. And just listening to Jesus' words should inspire a trust in him. And to fight off those internal thoughts that say, I'm not changing for no one. See, Jesus wasn't that way. He noticed people. He stopped for people. He listened to people. He touched people who were lonely. He fed people. He was inconvenienced by people. He healed them and welcomed them and forgave them and served them and gave himself up for them. He didn't walk into a crowd asking, hey, what can you people do for the King of Kings? He walked in the crowd and essentially said, I'm here to proclaim good news. I'm here to be good news for the poor, the prisoners, the blind, the oppressed, to proclaim God's favor on you. There's another way to sing that we say around here quite often, and that's Jesus was essentially here to be good news for everyone. Based on Jesus' example and these other scriptures and instructions to his disciples, 3C, we are focused on being externally focused. Not on ourselves, but to the people God has called us to serve. So I want you to answer a few questions for you as you wrestle with this value of our church of externally focused, because loving our neighbors is the best expression for our love for God. What can you do personally this week to be more externally focused where you live, work, and play? I talked about last week the Toll family and the heathens that I grew up with, right? What can you do with that family of yours, or the people that are right across the fence from you or across the street, or maybe some cultural barrier that you could cross? What could you do personally this week to be good news, be externally focused, not internally focused? I mentioned C groups earlier, and if you're not in a C group, boy, I really honestly feel like you're missing out on what church is actually meant to feel like. And if you're interested in a C group, please sign up. But if you're a part of a C group already, what are you doing as a C group to be externally focused? You're probably really good at scheduling times to meet up and the days of the week and figuring out whose house you're going to, figuring out what you're going to eat and this sort of thing. But are you as a group externally focused on serving others? Let's go, C groups. And third, maybe this is a good starting point for some of you who just come on Sundays and take a seat and participate. Well, what can you do to help our 3C gatherings on Sundays be more externally focused? I'm telling you right now, when people walk in this room, they should feel the most welcome and most greeted as they ever have. Now, don't creep them out, right? You Christians, you can be creepy sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Don't creep them out. But by gosh, they should not leave here not feeling seen, not feeling loved and welcome, because that's good news. Everyone in here should walk out of here having experienced some form or fashion of good news. And some fat guy on stage is not going to be good enough to make them feel the good news. It has to be real and authentic. If you're coming on Sundays and you're just taking a seat and that's it, it's time to take another step. How could you serve when you gather with us on Sundays? This should be the place where all of us feel good news the most. In fact, that's the purpose of gathering. It is to break the bad habits that we learn out there that the enemy and the world tries to get us to buy into. We come here to remind ourselves of the truth of who God has said we are and what he has called us to do. We're tempted out there to get internally focused. And the reason we come here is to remind ourselves of who our true identity, of who we are in him, and what we've really been called to do. And part of that is to be externally focused, not internally focused. My friends and brothers and sisters, pray with me. God, remind us that we are your plan A as your church, as your kingdom representatives of your good news, and there is no plan B. And so that you have called us not to be selfish or self-centered, both individually and as a body of believers. That you have called us to be externally focused, because you not only taught us that, but you set example of that. And so may we, Lord, be more like you, so that we can represent you and your kingdom well to a world that's increasingly sad and with bad news. May we be reminded of the truth of your good news. May our cups be full of it, so that we can be good news and we can be externally focused, not give in to the temptation of internally focused. We thank you so much for being a God who prioritized us, who loved us, and show us how to live this life. Help us to be like you. In Jesus' name.